Viewer discretion is advised. She had bought them with the loose change she found in the pockets of dead women. Welcome back, Shadow Dwellers. Tonight we have 3 Appalachian Mountains horror stories inspired by real events. But that final story? It's a chilling reminder that the people who smile the brightest often have the darkest secrets buried just out of sight. Now let the nightmare begin. Grief doesn't just break a heart, it breaks the whole house. Daryl learned this at 16. His mom didn't just die of skin cancer. She took the warmth of the world with her, leaving behind a husband who forgot how to rest and a son who didn't know how to be a man. His dad was a mechanic, built from wire and grit. He buried his pain under 14-hour shifts, working until his knuckles bled just to keep the fridge full. Every evening followed the same crushing routine. The heavy smell of grease, a desperate bear hug, and a rough kiss on the forehead. It was a silent confirmation that they were still a team. But that was all the energy the man had. After the hug, he would retreat into the master bedroom. 10 minutes later, the sound would start. It was the dry, repetitive grinding of charcoal pencils against drywall. The father wasn't sleeping. He was drawing massive, intricate dragons on the white gypsum. It was the only way he knew how to let the anger out without screaming. Daryl understood the silence. But outside the house, the quiet was suffocating. The family had moved to the mountains only a year before the sickness took hold. So Daryl was a double outcast. He was the grieving kid, and he was the new kid. School was a gauntlet of pity where everyone kept their distance. Everyone except the kids across the creek. The house next door was a foster home, a revolving door of outcasts who knew what it felt like to be broken. They were the ones who bridged the gap, wading across the shallow creek one afternoon to sit on Daryl's porch. They didn't offer pity, they offered presence. For weeks they became a pack. They pulled Daryl out of the gray fog of his grief and back into childhood. They played tackle football in the mud until their jerseys were ruined. They played hide and seek in the dense rhododendrons along the property line, hiding until the sun went down and the fireflies came out. For the first time since the funeral, Daryl had brothers. They were loud, rough, and genuine. But gravity pulls everything downhill eventually, especially in the high country. The geography of the Appalachian Mountains created a dangerous gap. In Rabun County, Georgia, the roads wind like snakes, spreading the school districts wide across the ridges. Daryl's bus dropped him off at the end of the road at 2:15 p.m. The foster kids, who were bused to a different school further out in the county, didn't get home until 3:30 p.m. That hour and 15 minutes became the trap. Daryl would walk down the driveway, empty house waiting on the left, occupied house waiting on the right. Miss Sheila, the foster mom with the deep tan and the faded blue Letterman jacket, would be waiting on the porch. She noticed the schedule gap immediately. She insisted Daryl didn't need to sit in an empty house by himself. She told him to come wait on her couch until the boys got home. It seemed innocent. It seemed like kindness. Stepping into the neighbor's yard felt like stepping into a sanctuary. Sheila didn't look like a guardian. She looked like a peer. The vibe was electric. She welcomed Daryl as a guest of honor. A cold Miller Lite slid across the table. A pack of Marlboros followed. She smiled, validating the boy in a way the tired father couldn't. Those afternoons became the ritual. For 75 minutes every day, it was just the two of them. Sitting on the floral print couch, the distance between Daryl and Sheila would shrink. A denim leg pressed against a knee. A hand brushed imaginary dust from a shoulder. Sheila would ask questions about his life, his dad, his feelings, questions no one else asked. By the time the foster kids' bus chugged up the Georgia hills and the boys came running in for football, the groundwork had already been laid. Daryl felt special. He felt chosen. Proximity played a dangerous role. The two houses sat only 60 feet apart, bedroom windows facing each other like unblinking eyes. Around 10 p.m., the light in Sheila's window would blaze to life. Daryl, sitting in the darkness of his own room, would watch. The performance always began the same way. Sheila would change into sleepwear. The stereo would flare with the opening piano chords of November Rain. A rocking chair sat facing the window. She would settle into it, placing a porcelain doll on her lap and a plastic comb in her hand. She would begin to brush. The rhythm matched the charcoal drawing in the other house. For 9 minutes, she would comb the doll's hair. No blinking, just a dead 1,000-yard stare directed straight at the darkness where Daryl sat. Daryl saw a shared solitude, a connection between two broken people. October brought the homecoming party in the barn. At midnight, a plastic Burger King crown was placed on Daryl's head. A Polaroid camera flashed. A hug followed, tight and possessive. The crash came 3 days later. Walking home from school, Daryl saw sheriff's deputies swarming the driveway. The foster kids were let out first, heads hanging low. Then Sheila emerged. The cool, confident woman was gone. In her place was a figure wild with panic. Handcuffs locked her wrists behind her back. As the deputies dragged her toward the cruiser, her eyes locked onto the lead detective. Her face crumpled. She wasn't fighting them, she was begging them. She looked desperate, pathetic, like a teenager caught acting out. Details trickled out later. The police found the real story in the basement. It was a shrine to high school. Stacks of VHS tapes lined the shelves. Recordings of the football games, recordings of the couch sessions, and hundreds of hours of footage filmed from behind a curtain in the upstairs bedroom. Every night, while Daryl had watched her comb the doll's hair, a camera had been recording him watching her. The police found notebooks too, scripts. She had been writing out scenes for the foster kids to play out. Who would tackle who in football, where to hide during hide and seek to make the game last longer. She wasn't raising them, she was directing them. The friendship, the games, the open window, it was all stage direction written to get the perfect reaction shot from the boy across the creek. She got 5 years. Daryl's dad was too tired to pack boxes. He stayed in the house, scrubbing the charcoal dragons off the walls, though the gray stains remained. Daryl stayed until he was 21, keeping his blinds closed. Then he went to trade school, got his CDL, and became a long-haul trucker. Years turned into decades. The dad never left, though. He was too stubborn to leave the holler. He's still there, an old man now, sitting in that house with the ghost dragons on the walls. Daryl visits faithfully. Every Thanksgiving and Christmas, he parks his rig and drives his pickup back up that winding mountain road. It's a pilgrimage. The woods have reclaimed much of the land, and his dad's house looks tired, the roof sagging like a broken spine. But across the creek, the view never changes. Sheila's house always gleams with fresh white paint. The grass is always manicured, and the porch is always occupied. An elderly woman sits in the rocking chair. Her hair is gray now, but the blue Letterman jacket is the same. Smoke curls from a cigarette as she stares out at the empty yard. Every time Daryl's truck crawls past, her head turns. The eyes lock onto him. No wave, no smile. Just a long drag from the cigarette and a slow exhale of smoke toward the creek. She doesn't look scary. She just looks like a woman waiting for the bell to ring so she could go to her next class. Daryl spent years closing his blinds to keep the world out. But in our next story, a group of kids discovers that sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't who is watching you from across the street. It's what is waiting for you right under the floorboards. Brantley wasn't the kind of kid who looked for trouble, but growing up in the Appalachian foothills of West Virginia in the late 80s, trouble usually found you anyway. He was part of that specific generation of boys who lived their lives on bicycles and in backyards, unsupervised from the moment the sun came up until the streetlights flickered on. They were the kids who rented the same scratched-up horror VHS tapes from the video store every Friday night, memorizing every kill scene and jump scare until the tape wore thin. They were loud, they were reckless, and they were obsessed with the thrill of the unknown, because when you live in a town where nothing ever happens, you have to go out and make something happen. For Brantley, the woods weren't just trees and dirt. They were a kingdom. He was the grounded one of the group, the kid who brought the extra flashlight and the compass, while everyone else brought bottle rockets and potato chips. He prided himself on being the skeptic, the one who would watch Friday the 13th and point out the zipper on the monster's suit. But deep down, he loved the rush just as much as the others. He loved the folklore that seemed to drip off the mountains like morning fog, the local legends that every dad whispered to his son while cleaning a deer rifle in the garage. And the biggest legend of all was the Vegetable Man. It sounded stupid if you didn't live there, a plant man with thorns for fingers. But in Fairmont, it was gospel. It was the ultimate dare. To Brantley and his two best friends, Blake and Jace, finding the Vegetable Man became a sort of holy grail. They didn't really believe they'd find a monster, but they believed in the adventure of it. It was January 12th, 1987, a night that Brantley remembers as being cold enough to hurt. The air had that sharp metallic taste that only comes in the dead of winter, and the ground was frozen solid. Brantley led the way, carrying his father's 6D-cell maglite. It was heavy, a solid bar of aluminum that felt reassuring in his grip, a tool that made him feel like a soldier on patrol rather than a 13-year-old boy in a parka. Blake was right beside him, struggling with the bulk of a Panasonic Omni-Movie camcorder, while Jace brought up the rear. Jace was the wild card, the kid who would climb a water tower just to see if he could spit on the roof of the police station. He was the one you always had to watch. Their destination was the Henson Place, a rotting farmhouse that the local kids knew as the stomping grounds of the Vegetable Man. The house sat on the edge of the property line, surrendering to gravity after 20 years of neglect. It looked less like a home and more like a pile of gray driftwood. The windows were sealed with warped plywood, and the silence surrounding the lot felt heavy and artificial. Brantley wanted to scan the perimeter systematically, to approach this sensibly, but Jace didn't have the patience for that. Jace vaulted the rusted cattle fence and took off running toward the house, vanishing into the deep shadows near the foundation without even looking back. Brantley felt a flash of irritation because Jace was always ruining the setup, always rushing to the punchline, but he let it go. He signaled for Blake to start filming. They moved through the yard, their breath clouding in the flashlight beam, scanning the tree line for anything out of place. That's when Brantley saw it. A tall, thin figure was standing motionless near the corner of the porch. Brantley stopped dead. His heart hammered against his ribs because for a second, the rational part of his brain shut down. The silhouette was perfect. Long, spindly arms, a thin torso, just standing there waiting. He swung the heavy beam of the maglite directly onto the figure, his muscles tensing for a fight, but the light revealed a dead cedar tree. It was stripped of its bark, leaving white wood that looked like bone. Brantley let out a long breath, feeling foolish for flinching. It was just a trick of the light. He adjusted his grip on the flashlight, ready to move forward and find Jace. Then the sound began. A heavy, dull impact struck the floorboards above. Brantley froze. This wasn't the wind. It was the distinct, heavy sound of wood striking wood. It was followed immediately by the groan of a joist straining under significant impact. Blake swung the camera toward the porch, his hands shaking, but Brantley kept his eyes locked on the structure. The lattice skirting was rotted away, exposing the black void of the crawl space, and he could see the deck boards physically bowing downward. Another impact followed. Heavy, deliberate. Someone was hitting the floor from beneath. It sounded like a massive weight being slammed against the underside of the porch, creating a rhythm that mimicked the gait of a large man pacing back and forth. Brantley's mind raced through the possibilities, but it always landed on Jace. It had to be. He must have found a way under the porch and was banging on the floorboards to scare them. It was exactly the kind of cheap physical prank Jace loved. Brantley felt the irritation return, hotter this time. He wasn't going to let Jace win. But the house remained silent aside from the thudding. No suppressed laughter. No gotcha. The rhythm shifted. The tempo increased, but the force grew violent. The ground near the porch foundation seemed to tremble. Whatever was doing that wasn't just knocking anymore. It was hammering. The sound became mechanical and aggressive, a repetitive slamming that echoed off the valley walls. Brantley felt his anger curdle into something colder because the consistency was too perfect. It was too relentless. He marched toward the exposed section of the porch lattice, ignoring Blake's silent plea to leave. Brantley gripped the decaying wood of the lattice and tore it free, opening a jagged window into the crawl space. He aimed the maglite into the subterranean dark, ready to yell at Jace to cut it out. Brantley stopped breathing. The crawl space smelled of wet earth and copper. The flashlight beam cut through the damp air, illuminating the mud floor. Jace was there. He was sitting in the mud about 10 feet back. He was holding a heavy, rotted fence post, a thick piece of oak about 3 feet long. He was gripping it with both hands, swinging it upward with mechanical precision. He slammed the wood against the bottom of the floorboards, let it drop, and slammed it again. Jace didn't acknowledge the light. He didn't acknowledge his friends. He was catatonic. His posture was rigid, his face pale and slack. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and fixed on the far corner of the foundation. He resembled a broken toy that had been wound up and left to run until the spring snapped. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't looking for a reaction. He was just swinging the wood, over and over, trapped in a loop. Brantley realized with a sickening drop in his stomach that this wasn't a prank anymore. Jace had gone down there to spook them, but something had stopped him. Something had broken him. Jace was staring past the beam of light into the obstacle corner, a triangular shadow behind the main support beam. Brantley forced himself to shift the beam. He had to see what Jace was seeing. The light washed over rolls of pink insulation, but then it settled on a small rubber sneaker. A child was curled in the fetal position, wedged between a cinder block pillar and the earth. He appeared to be 8 years old, dressed in a red nylon jacket stained with soil. The boy remained motionless. The skin on his face was gray and sunken, the texture of wet clay. It was the visage of a biology that had ceased to function months ago. Recognition hit Brantley like a physical blow. This was the child from the flyers taped to telephone poles across 3 counties. He had vanished in October. The knocking stopped. Jace's arms finally went limp, the fence post splashing into the mud. The silence that flooded the crawl space was heavier than the noise. Flight was instinctual. Brantley and Blake clawed their way out of the mud, slipping on the frozen grass, sprinting until their lungs burned. They reached the nearest farmhouse a mile down the road and pounded on the door until the wood splintered. The authorities arrived within the hour. The coroner confirmed the identity of the remains, but the investigation yielded no answers. They never could explain how an 8-year-old boy traveled 20 miles in the winter to die under a porch on Bunner Ridge. Psychologists argued that Jace's mind fractured upon discovering the body. They theorized he went down there to prank his friends, saw the boy, and entered a state of shock, continuing the knocking motion as a repetitive, unconscious tick. But Brantley never bought the shock theory. He knew Jace. He knew the kid was wild, but he wasn't weak. Brantley believes to this day that Jace wasn't just stuck in a loop. He believes Jace was hitting the floor for a purpose. He was making the loudest sound he could make, slamming that wood against the boards, trying to signal the outside world. He was trying to lead someone to that corner. Jace was pounding on those floorboards to let a secret out. But in our final story, we meet someone who was paid very well to keep her secrets locked behind a friendly smile and a warm box of donuts. You'll never look at a kind neighbor the same way again. Working the graveyard shift at the Notch wasn't a career choice. It was a necessity born of bad credit and student loans that wouldn't go away. Mason took the position because it offered a $1.50 shift differential and total isolation. As the night shift scale operator, his entire world was reduced to a 10 by 10 corrugated metal shack, a flickering CRT monitor, and the smell of ozone coming from a laser printer that jammed whenever the humidity rose. It was boring, repetitive, and exactly what he needed to pay the bills. Safety was the primary selling point. Nothing ever happened at the bottom of a 9% mountain grade in West Virginia, except broken brake lines and overheating engines. Tuesday nights were the only break in the monotony. That was when Junior rolled through. In a sea of rusted-out haulers and desperate independent contractors, Junior was the undisputed king of the road. He drove a 1984 Peterbilt 359, painted a deep, glossy black that seemed to absorb the yard lights. Purple underglow strips reflected off the wet gravel, making the rig look like something from another planet. Mason, sitting in his stained work shirt with a microwave burrito, couldn't help but feel a sharp pang of envy every time that Jake Brake barked in the hollow. Junior didn't just have the best truck, he had the lifestyle to match. He always wore crisp flannels and expensive boots, looking more like he was heading to a steak dinner than a timber yard. And he was never alone. Through the passenger side window, Mason would always see a silhouette. It was a rotating cast of women, different hairstyles, different profiles, different vibes. Sometimes the passenger looked bored, feet propped up on the dashboard. Other times, the figure seemed slumped against the glass, exhausted from the long haul. Mason never asked questions. In this line of work, discretion was part of the job description. He assumed Junior was just living the life of a super trucker with a girl in every county. Their interactions were a study in silent efficiency. Junior would stride into the office, bringing a gust of expensive cologne and cool night air with him. He would slide the logbook across the metal counter with a practiced, arrogant smirk. Mason would check the weight, stamp the page, and slide it back. No words were needed. The look in Junior's eyes said it all. "I'm getting away with it, and you're stuck in this box." Mason played his part. He stamped the book, feeling like a conspirator in a victimless crime. The guilt only really set in when Hattie arrived. Hattie was Junior's wife, and she was the complete opposite of the women Mason saw in the truck. She was small, modest, and looked like she baked cookies for the church fundraiser every Sunday. She would drive her sensible sedan down the gravel road an hour after Junior left, carrying a Tupperware container wrapped in a tea towel. She never stayed long. She would simply place the container on Mason's desk, offer a polite, sad smile, and leave. Inside, there were always 3 glazed donuts. Mason knew why she did it. She thought he was a good friend to her husband. She thought he was looking out for Junior. Every time he bit into one of those warm, sugary pastries, he felt like a fraud. He was eating her food while her husband was driving down Route 19 with a mistress. It was a comfortable, toxic routine that lasted for the better part of a decade. Then, the decay set in. Around 2008, the king started to lose his crown. The pristine Peterbilt began to rot. Mud caked the chrome stacks and stayed there for months. The purple underglow lights shorted out one by one, leaving the truck looking lopsided and broken in the dark. Junior's appearance mirrored his rig. The expensive cologne was replaced by the smell of unwashed clothes and nervous sweat. He stopped smirking. He would shove the logbook through the window with shaking hands, his eyes darting around the yard as if he expected the shadows to grab him. The passengers didn't stop, though. If anything, they became more frequent. Mason noticed they weren't moving as much anymore. No feet on the dashboard, no shifting positions, just a heavy, static slump against the passenger door. Mason noticed the weight on the scale, too. Every single Tuesday, the readout flashed the same number, 79,000 pounds. It was right at the legal limit, pushing the boundaries of what was safe on a mountain grade. Junior was running heavy, risking a wreck every time he touched the brakes. Hattie stopped coming around completely. The donuts vanished. Mason assumed the marriage had finally collapsed under the weight of Junior's infidelity. He figured Hattie had packed her bags and left. He didn't blame her. By 2010, the silence in the shack was absolute. That silence shattered on a rainy Tuesday in November. Mason was staring at the printer, waiting for a manifest, when the yard exploded with light. It wasn't the warm glow of a truck. It was the harsh strobe light blue of police cruisers. They coasted into the lot with their headlights off, surrounding the office like a pack of wolves closing in on a wounded animal. Before Mason could even process the intrusion, the door to his sanctuary was kicked in. State troopers in rain-slicked ponchos filled the small room, shotguns leveled at his chest. There was no negotiation. He was dragged out into the mud, cuffed and deposited on the bumper of a cruiser while they tore his office apart. He watched from the rain as they seized the filing cabinets. They weren't looking for drugs or money. They were taking the paper logs. Every single record he had signed for the last 9 years was loaded into an evidence van. A detective eventually approached him, lighting a cigarette with a hand that didn't shake. He explained the situation with terrifying clinical detachment. Junior wasn't just a cheater. The trophies found in the sleeper cab of the Peterbilt weren't gifts for mistresses. They were souvenirs, wallets, driver's licenses, and jewelry belonging to 9 different women who had gone missing from truck stops across 3 states. Mason learned that night that Hattie was the hero of the story. The detective revealed that she had walked into the barracks that morning with a flip phone full of photos. She had turned Junior in. Mason felt a swell of admiration for her. She had found a receipt for a diamond bracelet in Junior's jeans, proof he was spending money on another woman. And that was the final straw. She had finally stood up for herself. Mason spent the next 3 months trying to forget. He went back to work. He stamped logs. He tried not to think about the 79,000 pounds or the bodies. He thought about Hattie often, imagining her rebuilding her life, free from the monster. February brought the snow, and with it the state police returned. Mason watched from the window as the cruisers pulled up again. He expected follow-up questions. He expected to sign a witness statement. Instead, he saw a familiar sedan being towed into the impound lot. He watched as Hattie was pulled from the back of a cruiser. She wasn't the modest, sad woman he remembered. She was screaming, her face twisted in rage, kicking at the windows. The same detective stood by the shack, watching the scene with a grim satisfaction. He filled Mason in on the final piece of the puzzle. Junior, sitting in an interrogation room for 90 days, had plenty of time to talk. He knew he was going down, and he had no intention of going down alone. He told the investigators everything. He told them Hattie wasn't a victim. She was a partner. Hattie had been so confident, so arrogant in her belief that the police would never trust the word of a serial killer over a grieving wife. She thought she was untouchable. But the investigators followed up on Junior's claims. They subpoenaed the bank records. They found the storage unit. It turned out Hattie knew about the murders since 2001. She had been the accountant. She cleaned the blood out of the cab. She took the wallets and the jewelry from the victims. She fenced the goods and managed the profits. She was fine with the killing, as long as the money came home. She hadn't turned him in because of the murders. She turned him in because of the receipt. Junior had used the blood money, money Hattie felt she had earned by washing the truck, to buy a gift for a mistress. It wasn't conscience, it was a business dispute. Mason watched them shove Hattie into the transport van. He looked at the empty desk where the Tupperware used to sit. The realization hit him harder than the first raid. Hattie hadn't been bringing him donuts out of kindness. She had been checking in on the operation. She was keeping the witness happy, and those warm, glazed donuts. She hadn't bought them with honest wages. She had bought them with the loose change she found in the pockets of dead women. Mason wiped his mouth, but the phantom taste of sugar and copper wouldn't leave. The Appalachians have a long memory, and even longer shadows. If you think a kind face means a kind soul, just remember the phantom taste of copper in those glazed donuts. Click the next video right here for more true mountain terror. I'm the Shadow Teller. Stay safe in the dark.